Welcome to the Hunting Beast Podcast, your source for hunting tactics, news, and stories. And now your host, Mario Traficante.
Hello and welcome to the Hunting Beast Podcast. Today we have another well-known member of the Hunting Beast Forum, Tyler Whitt, also known as BigHunt. Tyler has been increasingly upping his game over the past several seasons, taking down mature whitetails during the Wisconsin bow and firearm seasons. Tyler is also an avid outdoorsman. When he's not chasing whitetails, he fills his days with bear hunting, turkey hunting, ice fishing, bow fishing, and more. Today, Tyler is going to discuss some preseason scouting tactics, some of his hunting setups, and other tactics that he uses for success. So with that, hey Tyler, how's it going?
Hello, Mario. Morning.
So
I'm doing very well, thank you.
You're doing very well? You got your coffee in you and everything?
Oh, yeah, good to go.
All right, well, I guess to get started, why don't you give us a little bit of a background about how you grew up, how you got involved in the outdoors and hunting, maybe note some of the mentors or people that were in your life that got you started.
Okay. Well, I grew up in southeast Wisconsin in the cattle moraine, the northern cattle moraine, that is. And as far back as I can remember, I was always out and about, exploring as a kid. I was out running, playing, cowboys, Indians, army. I was hiking, biking, fishing up any tree I could find, with or without branches. Making bows, arrows, all that stuff. On top of that, my grandfather, he had a house on a lake in southeast Wisconsin. It was called Wallace Lake. Sure. And I pretty much grew up on that lake. I learned how to fish there as a kid. That lake brings back a lot of memories for me. I can remember them bringing back tailgate fulls of deer during gun hunting to clean and stuff. Here I was, 6, 7 years old with a knife in my hand cleaning deer with my grandma. My grandma taught me, young about the wild edibles also. We'd also take a lot of trips to her favorite morel mushroom honey holes and roadside asparagus patches and stuff like that. Oh, and watercress beds also.
Nice.
I was also, I was always into the outdoors, but it wasn't until I was like 9 or 10 when my grandparents bought some land in western Wisconsin. I believe it was in 1997, a small 44 acres. My brother Nick killed his first deer, which was a nice buck back in the mid-'90s. I mean, to me at the time, the buck was a giant, but only like 120s,
Right.
And that was a buck that really got me interested in deer and deer hunting in general. I mean, I didn't really start bow hunting right away, but definitely spent, some time in the Whitt gun deer camp in western Wisconsin when I was old enough to, when they thought I was old enough to trudge along with them,
Right.
I didn't really learn much until I started hunting on my own. Slowly but surely, every year I would figure out little pieces of the puzzle, just enough to kill something. But it really wasn't until I found the beast when the light bulb came on.
Yeah, I think that's been true for a lot of guys. I was going to ask, because this comes up a lot when I'm talking to different people. A lot of the kids today are the guys that are getting into this late. Like, they didn't spend as much time as that running around, exploring, doing different things in the outdoors. How do you think that transitioned into some of the things you look at and the knowledge that you seek today?
I didn't really have, we didn't have much money growing up, so we didn't have game systems or computers or video games, so I kind of had to force myself to learn how to, make my own free time and my own fun time, really. And
Right.
Getting out into the woods, doing all that stuff, that was really my escape, So
Yeah, I think a lot of some of that trial and error of success and failure can happen a lot when you're a young kid doing that stuff in the outdoors, and you tend to learn a lot about how different animals move through their environment,
yeah.
how they use it,
Oh yeah.
and a
And
lot
another
about
thing was, another thing was that my mom, she'd say, "Go play." Well, I'd go play. She wouldn't be able to find me for hours and hours and hours. Same thing on my dad lived on a farm. He'd tell me to go do something, so I'd disappear all day, and it was pretty common to find me up a tree or down in the barn or doing this or doing that.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, but yeah, other than that, my grandpa, my dad, they really started, me off into hunting. Besides my brother Nick.
So, what are some of the key habits, that have contributed to your success? And I guess more importantly, when you started out initially hunting for the first time, what was going through your mind at that time? And then compare that to how you think about things now.
Okay. Well, when I first started hunting, it was kind of just doing it, family-wise, going up there with my cousins for gun deer camp. I never really got to go out with them at first. It was more of sitting in the cabin and waiting for the gunshots,
Right.
and then waiting for them to come back and stuff like that. And then they'd come back and get us, and then we'd go out and trail them and gut them and all that good stuff. But when I first started hunting, it was more of the family thing, spending time with them, just being out there, making my grandpa happy, because that's just what he wanted. He wanted all his grandsons up there hunting.
Right.
So, but it wasn't. I don't know why, but my cousins, they didn't really clue in, to the hunting thing as much as I did. Probably because they grew up in the city versus me, and I grew up kind of out in the country. So
Right.
they were more into sports and stuff like that, and I think they did that more for, hunting-wise, just to make my grandpa happy as well. But I was always, successful right off the bat, even with turkeys, deer. They always question me, "Oh man, how is he getting these deer?" And really, I wasn't really doing nothing special, But every deer that I killed up there made me think, all right, how did I get this one? How did I get the last one? And just stuff like that. And every year it just kept getting more and more. And I was always up there all the time, just hunting, sitting out there scouting. Not really scouting, but sitting up there and glassing. I used to like to just sit there and watch the deer all the time, just sit there and watch them, see what they do and stuff.
Right.
And then I started bow hunting. And when I first started bow hunting, I really wasn't into it. I was, but I wasn't, And then I killed my first buck, and when I killed that first buck, that's when I really started cluing in. I was like, all right, I want to do this,
Right.
And I had past experience from seeing deer and where they've been on the property and this and that. But it really wasn't until I found the beast, until, I really started cluing in on what I really needed to do for hunting-wise anyways. And I would say when I found the beast, I really started knocking them down. It just all made sense, the bedding and stuff, the tip of the point stuff, the thermals. Because I would always see the deer. They would come out of this corner down in the corner here of the woods.
Right.
And it was always on a southwest wind. And I was like, man, that wind is blowing down in there. It's got to be, wrong. But here, come to find out, that's the wind that they use. It's always on the downwind side, of that ridge that they're using.
Right.
And that corner is actually one of my greatest funnels on a southwest wind, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But I don't know, just stuff like that. Really, it was just being out there, I think, and watching the animals, how they're, moving, and a lot of it was my failures too. I dwell on the failures a lot, and I just like to think about what I did wrong, and then I'll go back and try to correct all that stuff, typical stuff.
So yeah, it sounds to me like you took a passion that was the outdoors and things that you enjoyed observing and scouting and glassing these deer, and started to turn that into a focus and a more directed purpose to to be more successful season after season. What
Exactly.
are you the type of guy? Do you keep? I know some guys keep logs and journals of what they see each day. They track the weather. I know you use trail cameras. Is there? Do you do things like that? I mean, when you're on these scouting sits, are you taking notes, or are you more like a mental note guy? And because this particular property, I guess you've been hunting for quite a while now. Do you know the lay of the land, so you're making mental notes of where you see things, or are you taking journals?
At first, I didn't really do journals because I didn't really know what I was doing.
Right.
But now that I started cluing in and I started knocking some deer down on the property, I started putting patterns together. And yeah, I think it was Microsoft Excel I was using. I had a big sheet, the time, the date, the weather, the wind, the moon phase. I had all that written down. If it was a buck, if it was a doe, where I seen it, this, that, and the other. And after about 2 years of doing that graph, you could really put together, especially, well, we could do a whole new podcast for moon movement, but the moon in general, that really, it really showed up on that graph, the moon movement.
Right.
And not only that, just weather movements.
When you're logging some of that data, those different moon phase times and movement on moon phase, movement on weather, would you then translate that into specific sits? I mean, did you start counting on that during a new season? I'm going to go sit in this spot during this moon phase, during this weather phase. It might seem kind of like an obvious question, but
yeah and no. Just because I try to target the bedding specifically, no matter what, the moon or weather.
Sure.
What I'll do is, besides trail cameras, obviously, is I'll sit back and I'll watch. Like, I'll watch for a day or two before I even hunt it because the property's so small.
Yeah, that's good information. So what else would you consider your key tactics or primary habits that allow you to be successful?
All right. Well, first and foremost, being patient. I mean, you've bow fished with me before, so you've seen how patient I can be.
Right.
I like to sit back and watch and wait and then move in for the kill. Secondly would be boots on the ground. I mean, to my knowledge, there's only 2 buck bedding areas and 3 doe bedding areas on the 40, my grandpa's property.
Right.
One of the buck bedding areas is always used on all winds, but an east wind, which in hill country is pretty rare. If there's a big buck holding up on that 40, the bedding area, that's the one. I mean, he's going to be in that bedding area because that's the number 1 bedding area on our property. Before I knew about the beast, before I scouted and had trail cameras, I would sit up in a tree and just glass all the areas I thought the bucks were coming out of the feed,
Right.
Pre-beast, I knew about bedding areas, but just never focused on them. After I bought Dan's Hill Country DVD, I was blown away about hunting bedding areas and was almost mad at myself for not cluing in, on bedding earlier on and stuff like that. And after the DVD, I started scouting my butt off, trying to find every bedding area I could. In a way, scouting is just as fun as hunting to me. I don't know about you or, other guys, but I love scouting. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And third, what? Go ahead.
Curious about that one bedding area that you said. If there's a big buck on the property, it's
Right.
going to be in that bedding area, and it's used on an east wind. What do you think, I guess, in your opinion, makes that spot so special that a big buck would want to bed there?
Well, yeah, I think you misunderstood me. It's not used on an east wind. It's used on all winds but an east wind.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Yeah. I mean, and an east wind is pretty rare in hill country. So, and I walked out on that point, and there's never a deer there on an east wind. It's always north, west, south, all those directions, but that east wind. He's got everything he needs there because of the wind and the way that point is. But
so he's got wind to his advantage. He's got sight to his
wind,
advantage.
sound. You can only really get like 150 to maybe 200 to 150 yards away. And you're lucky if that, because of the leaves, you know?
Right.
I mean,
So does
but
and is there any particular cover thicket that's just right on top of that point?
yeah, because we had our property logged off a few years ago,
Okay.
it was fairly open up there. But now that it's all growing in with briars and aspen whips, I think they're called, it got super thick up there. And I knew there was a bedding area there, and I would check it every year. But ever since we had it logged off, it seems like every year now it's getting better and better. And all them trails coming out of that point, they're just getting heavier and heavier, and the rub lines are getting more distinct, you know. So I think the logging really helped it, because it's pretty thick in there now. You really can't see like 30 yards in front of you.
Got it. So really, it's kind of those key things that people want to look for. You've got thick cover on a point. The deer is going to have the wind to his advantage, and he's going to have sight to his advantage because he's up high on a point.
Right. One thing I should say is it's pretty thick up on that point, but out in front of that point, it's fairly open. So he's got, or whatever deer is bedding there, they have that back cover to their back,
Right.
and they're looking down that point. And when I sat in that bed, you can see 300-400 yards down into that valley, even with green leaves. So he's got that whole area covered. And if I try sneaking in from behind, up top, that wind, he'll smell me, unless it's a side wind, which I try to hunt it on the side wind, so that doesn't happen.
Right.
But he's pretty much got that whole area to himself, and if he hears something or smells something or sees something, he's out of there.
Yeah, that's really good insight, especially specific to a spot like that in hill country, on what guys should look for. And especially, you know, some of those spots are super difficult to hunt because of the advantage that the animal has when he's in that bed.
Oh, yeah. And another thing is, a guy can't go in there with a permanent stand. I believe the deer are onto my property with my permanent stands. I went out and I bought 2 lone wolves, and I'm telling you, that changed everything, because I don't sit in the same tree twice in a year. I might, but it's very rare.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That lone wolf really steps up your game. You can get really close. You can almost sit in any tree you need to. Those permanent stands, when you sit there every year gun hunting or bow hunting, I think they catch on. If you go downwind like 80 yards of a permanent stand, there's a light, faint trail just skirting it. Because I believe those deer, they know, hey, that tree's being hunted.
Yeah, we had some permanent stands on some property that I've hunted quite a bit in my family. And up until probably 10 years ago, before we took them all down, we had some cases where we're on stand, and I would see deer make their way to me or make their way crossing where that other stand might sit, and they would look. They would look right where the stand was.
Right,
or they would work their way around it exactly how you described. So, yeah, I think a lot of people don't give deer as much credit for patterning people as much as they do, especially when you hunt those spots year after year after year.
Right.
Yeah, it's a good point to keep mobile.
Oh yeah. Another thing is I run a lot of cams. Right now I got 4 trail cams on the 40, and those 4 cams placed in the right spots tell me about 90% of what I need to know. I mean, it took me a few seasons to figure out where to put the cams. Once I narrowed down, how and where the bucks were traveling, the pics started rolling in. It was pretty obvious. Say, okay, on cam A, 10 minutes after dark, the buck's on cam A. And then all of a sudden, cam B, it's 10 minutes later, he's on cam B, and then cam C, and so on. So you put those patterns together, you can really, especially if you know where that bedding is. Say, I know where this bedding is off the point. He comes out of the point, hits camera A, then camera B, then camera C. I have a general direction on which way he's moving. and I can almost narrow down those couple of bedding areas on my property.
Nice.
I mean,
and then you have a
I was able to.
you have a timeline. You have a timeline of when he's moving as well.
Right. And that's the same for the neighbor's property too, because a lot of the bucks I'm killing are coming from the neighbor's property, and I'm just kind of sitting there waiting for them. But I'm sitting back. I'm not down there hunting. I'm either sitting back and glassing, or I'm letting the cameras tell me when to move in. I usually don't move in like real close to the property line until I know, okay, that buck's on the property in daylight on my property. And then I move in, and usually the first hunt is when I see them or kill them. So
tell me a little about your camera placement. You said it took you a while to figure out where the best spots were to place the cameras. Do you think in the beginning you were like over aggressive, you were sticking them too close, and then, or what?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Before the beast, I just threw them everywhere because I didn't know what the heck, I was like, oh, I'll go put it here, go put one there, go put one here. But then I realized after listening to the Dan talk all the time, keep those cameras out of the woods, away from the bedding, keep them on the edge of the field, because I always had the cameras just scattered everywhere, and the pictures were just random.
Right.
And then I started cluing in on the field edge where the farmer was, and I noticed this kid was always running around on the field edge. And the deer are always out there, so they have to be kind of comfortable, with the scent right there.
Right.
Because the farmer's always there, the kid's always running around, making noise. So I started putting those cameras on the field edge, pretty much, in the feeding areas. Because really, at first, I just wanted to get pictures of bucks, But now, the way I think about it now is I want to just get pictures of the deer for inventory. I really don't care. I care what they look like. It's cool to get pictures and all, but now I use the cameras for patterns, and, if I see a deer's coming out in a certain area, I can put a pattern together there and a pattern on the other side of the property, stuff like that.
Right. You start using them more as a tool versus, just to capture some pictures and get some enjoyment. Exactly.
Right. And another thing I noticed is when the farmer has a corn strip tied up against the wood,
right.
It's almost like a travel corridor. And I know Bucky has talked about this as well, that's one of his favorite areas to put trail cameras is right on the edge of a field where corn butts up against the woods. And I'll tell you what, I get pictures all day long on that corn edge. The year the farmer doesn't have the corn there, nothing. It's like night and day difference. I don't know what it is. Maybe because they still feel safe because it's thick,
Right.
But
I've noticed that in scouting on foot, on those edges where they have that corn, they have that corn butted up tight to that wood edge. Mm-hmm. And you may have a thick wood line, but you'll just get an unbelievable amount of tracks. Like I've followed track patterns in that little narrow channel between the corn and the wood line. In years where there's not corn there, and again, it might seem obvious, you don't get as many tracks or as much. And it seems like if there's a little pinch point where the corn transitions to an open section of the field, and that's directly adjacent to a wood line, that little pitch point is just full of tracks. It's almost like every deer funnels through that area to make its way out into the field. Like they can stage in that corn before they make their way into the open field.
Right.
Good stuff.
Yep. See, another thing I like to do is I like to obviously sit back and glass. I love glassing, but I also like to shine. But because it's 2.5 hours away, it's kind of hard for me to shine as much as I need to, to get a good pattern going. But whenever I'm up there, I shine as much as I can, as long as I can, and I'll even try different times of the night, stuff like that. I'll hit it an hour after dark, I'll hit it just after dark, and then an hour after dark, and then another hour, just to see what came into the field or, stuff like that.
Right. Plus, shining's fun. I mean, we're legally able to do it in the state of Wisconsin, and I enjoy it. You get a catalog of a lot of times you see deer that normally you're not seeing during daylight hours, and you really do get to understand how they travel and where they're patterning. You can put them in relationship to that field that you shine them in and start thinking about, okay, how far did that deer travel to get here? What time did he get up? And start
Right,
trying to put together
exactly.
patterns like that.
Yep.
All right. Well, if those are some of the key habits and I guess things you do on a yearly basis. Maybe you want to take us through your progression. What's going to be your progression for 2017, or I guess end of 2016 into 2017? What are some of the things you do to get your setups going, to start focusing in on a couple target animals and things like that?
Well, like I said, I gather trail cam pics, glass, shine. The glassing and the pics give me the most intel. I do most of my scouting during gun deer when I'm walking around, doing drives and stuff. Everything is fresh at that time, such as the sign, like rubs, scrapes, the beat down trails, even the bedding sign. Like when I first started figuring out the property after the DVD, I would just set up randomly, but still use the principles of the 1/3 elevation, downwind side of the ridge, etc., just to see where the deer were moving. I was able to get lucky and kill a buck on my first year trying the B-style hunting, but, took me 2 to 3 years before I really clued into where the deer were traveling, especially the bucks, the mature bucks. After, about 6 years of hunting slash observation, I pretty much have the property figured out. And, I've killed some really nice bucks off it since.
Right.
There's a few go-to spots that I sit every year. Not the same tree as I covered before, but the same area. I really don't have a set area for setups on the 40. I'll sit back, watch, wait, check cams, gather my info, and I'll go into my, I'll go in on my best educated guess on where the buck is coming from. Because it's only 44 acres, I only get 1 to 2 hunts in early season, 1 to 2 hunts, mid-season, and maybe 1 to 2 hunts during the rut. During the rut, on the third day, the deer are definitely onto us, on our property anyways, especially
Right.
the local deer anyway. So I really have to tread lightly if I, want to consistently kill. There's always those few family members I have to work around because they fall turkey hunt. They mainly stick to the field edges, so it's not so bad. During gun hunting, everyone has their set area. I usually pick what area I'm hunting based on the wind, and everyone else gets the rest. They're welcome to sit anywhere they want in that area. I try to tell them how and where to set up and why, but really it's up to them. As I always say, you can lead a blind horse to water, but you can't make them drink.
Right.
But, it's just simple things like that. It's pretty much how I, go to it.
Yeah, I can relate to the overpressuring of property because, again, the property that's in my family that hunted for many years, we used to overpressure it, overhunt it because you want to get up there, you want to hunt, you want to see what's going on. But what I've learned, I learned the same thing is that you made a comment by the third day the deer are onto you, and you go up there and you hunt. 3-4 days in a row, and then you go up and do it another weekend and then another weekend.
Mm-hmm.
By that 5th, 6th weekend, you're not seeing the deer that you did initially, and you've then altered the pattern of the movement. And I know the last couple seasons, basically we've stayed out of there and only hunted it a couple times, during specific time periods of the season. There's only a few small bedding areas. There's a good key time during the rut that they run this ridge, and another time during the early season. But encounters have been up significantly since doing that. And stand placement and other things factor in. but the deer don't feel as pressured and they stay in the area.
Right. Another thing I want to add is I killed that buck, the flyer buck last year on November 4th, and Predator TC was coming up the hunt with me that weekend, and I set him up in the exact same area. The next day, he had I believe it was 4 or 5 bucks come through, and then that next day, he almost didn't have no deer come through. So by the third day, they were pretty much onto us, and that was pretty much it for the season there on the property. I mean, until gun hunting.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, until you knock down another giant during gun season.
Yep. But.
All right. Well, I know you spend time. Obviously, we've talked a lot about hill country, and I know you and I have gone scouting in Dan's workshops, but gone into swamps and marshes, and I know you've talked about scouting some areas that are up by where you live now. What is the big differences, I guess, in your mind between the hill country, the swamps, the marshes? Since you hunt both of those, what are different things you do to manage hunting them?
Well, I would say access is key for all terrains. I try my hardest, I try not to let my scent blow into the bedding. I'll swing way out of the way if need be, so my scent never reaches the bedding. Makes sense.
Right.
The marsh, in the marsh, you're getting 90 to 40 yards from the bedding in most situations, and that holds true for swamps as well. In the hill country, though, it can be a little tricky because the deer have some advantages like sight, sound, and smell. In hill country, you're lucky to get within 100 to 200 yards of a mature bedded buck. And if you really think about how mature buck beds in hill country, off the tip of a point, wind the back, smelling anything that comes from behind, getting those thermals rising up in their nose. You can also see what's going on with his eyes for a certain distance, whether it's 100 to 200 yard circle, and that will vary too on the season, such as early season and leaf drop later on. But really, the trick is to get within shooting distance of that tiny little security circle where that buck feels comfortable. And that can be said for the marsh and the swamp also. Getting close to the bedding is key. As Dan says, bedding. In swamps and marsh, you can really sneak up close on them because of there's some kind of sound barrier, such as tall marsh grass or cattails. It's amazing. You get down in those cattails, and I know you know this, and it's like a sound buffer. You can't hardly hear anything down there. So I can see how Dan's getting within 40 yards of these bucks, and they don't even know he's there.
Right.
I mean,
yeah, that's a good point, because I grew up mainly hunting in a spot that was hill country, and
right.
Early season when you've got a lot of green, sight wise, you have a little more leeway. You can get in and encroach a little bit, but
movement as well too.
Yeah, once that greenery comes down, I mean, when you actually start finding some of those bedding spots and you sit in that bed and you look at where they can see on the vantage point, I mean, I remember sitting in a couple of the beds I found on our property, and I could see clear to where the logging road is that comes on the property. And I'm thinking to myself, if there's a mature animal sitting here, it's watching me come in,
Right.
So there's some challenges there where, a lot of the swamp spots or marsh spots I go, good, bad, or indifferent, you're walking in a significant distance, but getting on the tip of a oak island and then having that bed be out in the middle of the cattails, you can be a little more stealthy. You still got to be quiet, but there's some advantages there from a sight standpoint,
Right. Yeah, there's actually a spot in hill country where this buck bedding area, I should say, it's real close to the edge of the field, and the hunt that I have to get down and literally crawl like 100 yards. Because when I sat in that buck bed, you could see that whole field edge where I walked down, come in on the trail. the whole other field edge where it wraps around. So that deer was watching me every time, or any hunter, that came down there, a predator for say, every time that we came walking down in there, he was gone because he was sitting there watching us.
Right.
So now when I get in there, I literally get down on my hands and knees and army crawl, and then I get to this tree and slowly sneak up. And I've had that work because that's where I killed the buck in 2014, I believe it was, where I left my bow at my cabin. Remember, I dropped Dan off and I had to drive all the way back? Yeah, That was the buck. He came out of that bedding area. Because the cameras told me he was in the field in daylight, cameras don't lie, so
right.
Otherwise I usually wouldn't do that, but because the camera was telling me he was coming out in daylight, and because I was helping Dan, I wasn't really up there hunting, so the pressure wasn't on. So that first night when I slipped in there, I got down real low on my hands and knees, and I snuck up that tree, and I set up, and he come out right at closing, basically, but I got him,
Yeah.
But and there's, certain bedding areas where they have them specifically set up to watch you as the hunter come in, and people don't realize that.
Yeah, you can hunt a property, I guess, your entire life, and until you start either picking up on some of these points or clues, you may walk in and bump deer over and over and over again, and you never see those deer on the property. Obviously, with the introduction of trail cameras, and if you use them correctly, it can give you a lot of advantages to gather that intel on animals that otherwise we would have never seen before.
Right.
Yeah, good stuff. So why don't you tell us about your 2016 bow buck?
That was pretty interesting. It was like mid-October. I shouldn't say I'd never seen the buck, because I believe that I have trail cam pictures of him from the year before, but it's kind of hard to say. But I never seen him before that I can really put a T on anyways. But mid-October, the neighboring property, he sent me a message asking if I ever seen this buck, which was kind of a mistake. and I was like, nope, never seen him before, this and that. And as it went on, hunting went on, and that was the one deer. I was getting some other nice bucks on trail camera, but that flyer buck, that was the one deer that really stuck out in my mind. I really wanted to get that deer. And I went up there, like I said, it was like mid-October, and I checked my trail cameras, like I usually do, like every 2 to 3 weeks. And then I noticed he was in my food plot, this little food plot that I put in 2 years ago. He was passing through, so I'm like, oh, that put on a light bulb right there. I knew he was kind of in my area, but he was still traveling because my neighbor's property is, it's 600-700, almost 1,000 yards away, and really that's not far for a deer to travel because it's all still within 5 or 6 mile radius, the square block.
Right.
But yeah, I started getting trail cam pictures of him mid-October, and all of a sudden, like right around October 25th is when he really started blowing up on my cams. It was every cam, every night. He was here, then he was there, then he was there, then he was coming back. So he was like going back and forth. I think he was just checking does, And I waited. I didn't go in there. I didn't hunt. I sat back. I waited. I even glassed a night or two, which sounds pretty crazy because, October 25th, you'd think you'd be in a tree.
Right,
but
exactly.
I sat back, I glassed and I waited. I even shined a couple nights, and I got this one trail cam picture of him in daylight. I believe it was 2 days before I killed him. So that would have been, I killed him November 4th. So me and TC, we planned on going up that weekend to hunt. And I actually was going to work that Friday, but I had off. So I went up. I left, mid-morning Friday, and I went up, and I was like, all right, trail cam pictures from last weekend. He's telling me he's around, So I'm going to get in there, slip down, check my camera. Sure enough, there he was, broad daylight, an hour before closing. I'm like, oh, yeah, this is going to be good. So I sit down there on the inside corner of this field edge. It's a perfect funnel right there. The way this ridge butts up right up against the field edge.
Sure.
And that's an inside corner field funnel right there. And historically, that funnel has been really good to me throughout the years. And that's the third buck I've killed there. It's the biggest, but, I snuck down in there. I checked the camera. I saw he was on there. I slipped in, and I forget what day. It was kind of warm that day. It was like 50, 60 degrees, And stupid me, I forgot my video camera up in the truck. So I get down to my tree, and sure enough, there's all these nice rubs opened up. There was a couple fresh scrapes in the funnel, that weren't there the weekend before.
Right.
So I'm sitting there, I'm really kicking myself for not having my camera, and I'm like, well, what are the chances of me killing them anyways,
Yeah, I'm sure
And
Dan
actually-
reminded you of forgetting your camera, too.
Oh, yes, he did. He sure did. But, I actually got pretty tired because it was warm, and I crawled down for like an hour, and I slept at the base of my tree. What I should have done, yeah, right? What I should have done was I should have went up to my truck and just set out my camera. But, it is what it is,
Yeah.
But anyways, I was sitting there, and it was dead quiet. You could hear a pin drop on the other side of the valley. There wasn't a breath of wind. There's just squirrels everywhere, just crashing and banging, and I was really just sick of looking at the noises because I knew it was squirrels. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting there, and around like 4:30, I hear this really low, deep growl or a grunt.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, whoa, what the heck is that? And it was just on the other side of the ridge, on the valley there. And I could hear him crashing around, and I got my binocs, and I could see him running around, but I didn't know how big of a buck was. I could just see he had antlers. He was chasing a doe, and it seemed like they worked their way down the valley, and I couldn't hear him anymore. So I sat down, I was like, man, that was cool,
Right.
And I was sitting there, and all of a sudden, all these squirrels, that's all you hear are squirrels. So I was really getting sick of looking. All of a sudden, I thought I heard a stick snap. I was like, whatever, I'll just keep looking ahead. All of a sudden, I heard another stick snap. I'm like, oh, that ain't no squirrel,
Right.
So I turned my head slightly, and I looked behind me, and right behind me, coming through the funnel, here's this doe like 30 yards standing there, and she's eating these maple leaves. I caught the movement of the branch getting ripped down because she kept ripping for the leaves.
Right.
I was like, oh, look, there's a doe. And all of a sudden, I look behind her, and there's a bigger deer standing there. I'm like, oh, there's a buck. But I didn't know how big it was, so I grabbed my binocs, and I look. And the first thing I seen was his flyers on the backside, and instantly I knew what buck it was, and I went into hunt mode right away.
Right.
I put my binocs down, and I grabbed my bow, and I faced the tree, and now the tree was in between me and the deer, because they're behind me.
Sure.
And I readied myself, and the doe, she slowly but surely took a couple steps, and he would take a couple steps. They'd look around, and every once in a while he'd do like some soft tending grunts and stuff. You could barely hear the grunts. I couldn't believe it. And it was so quiet out, I could barely hear those grunts, and he was 30 yards from me.
Right.
That's how soft he was grunting. But she was coming at me, and then I thought she was going to come to the right, which would have been really bad because there's no way I would have been able to get my bow over from how quiet it was. They would have for sure heard me. But luckily, she veered to the left of my tree, which was all open, which was all my shooting lane. And he held back a little bit, but really it was only a 5-yard shot. Yeah, she walked past. He continued to follow. He hung back just a little bit. And we got those clips on our hunter safety harnesses, to clip ourselves in down by our legs. And I'm sitting there holding my bow, and for some reason my wrist jerked, and then my bottom cam, it clinked off the clip. And all of a sudden the buck looks up at me. And all I see is his rack because there's a huge tree. He can't see me, but he looked up because he heard something. And I guarantee you, if this was early season, it would have been all over. I probably wouldn't have got the buck. But because he was on that doe, he was stupid,
Right.
And that doe, the buck's that's staring, I'm sitting there, I'm like, all right, this is now or never. Either the hunt's going to happen now or I'm going to blow it and the damn thing's going to run off. Well, the doe, the buck's looking up at me, and the doe starts walking. All of a sudden, that took his attention off me, and he looked away. And when he did that, I drew my bow, and surprisingly, he didn't hear me. I think because of the crashing of the leaves and stuff from the doe.
Right.
But he started walking again, and there was one tiny, like a foot wide gap between these trees. I'm like, all right, that's my kill area right there. He got it right there. I made a little bleep, with my mouth. He stopped. He didn't even look at me. He just stopped and looked forward. I was already drew back. I settled the pin, watched the Luminok bury right in the crease. He took off like a bat out of hell. He ran up towards the ridge, maybe about 100 yards, and I seen him flop over.
Nice.
That was pretty funny. There was a bunch of squirrels. They were chattering and stuff, but when I shot the deer, it went completely dead quiet.
Right.
You couldn't hear anything. But yeah, instantly I called Predator TC, and he heard me breathing real heavy. He's like, "You just killed him, didn't you?" I was like, "Yep, I sure did." He knew exactly what was going on. He didn't even have to ask, because he was probably wondering why I called him an hour before dark.
Right.
Yeah, and that's pretty much how it went down. First sit in, I waited, I sat back, waited, watched, gathered the intel, and I went in, and bang.
That's very cool. But
Yeah.
very much shows, too, how knowing your property,
Right.
not only with what you had with your cameras, but knowing the specific areas and how to pressure it. I mean, having the patience to know that buck was moving on your property and sitting back and glassing, sitting back and shining, sitting back and observing. I know a lot of guys, if they would get something like that on camera, I mean, their first inclination is to get in a stand and get in a stand as soon as possible and sit.
Right.
But yeah, it sounds like you really put yourself in a place of advantage by waiting for the perfect time, and especially waiting till you got that daylight pick so you knew when the proper time was to go in.
Right. Time is key, and also what I should have said before was I forgot to mention that the wind, those pictures I was getting them on was always a southwest wind, which for that funnel is the best wind because it goes up and over, down into the valley.
Right.
I forgot to mention that before, but the wind, it was always a southwest wind when I got those pictures of them. It was no other wind. So I really had to sit back and not only wait for the trail cam pics of daylight, but I had to wait for that right wind to go in there.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point to bring up because, if you get in there on the wrong wind, he's busting you before he even gets close.
Right.
Cool. That's a cool story.
Oh, yeah.
So that buck obviously was taken in a hill country setup, but I know you hunt a lot of marshes and swamps. So why don't you get into your tactics and some of the setups you do when you're hunting the marshes and swamps?
Okay, well, number one, I love to spot check the bedding areas, that I found or are looking at online, like cyber scouting with Google Earth.
Sure.
In the early season, I'll take a mid-morning walk, and I'll check some bedding for, that day's wind, specifically that day's wind, and see if any fresh to medium sign catches my eye, like rubs, scrapes, or tracks, coming on a beat-down trails. And if there's something I like, I'll hunt it because I hate to burn an area, if it's just medium sign. Believe it or not, I've had a nice buck come out of a bedding area with no sign. So, I hate to burn those bridges. But besides all that about the bedding, on the transition lines, points, fingers, bowls, after hunting with Predator TC this past season, I come to realize that I need to get way closer to bedding in the marsh and swamps.
Yeah.
One hunt in particular stood out to me with them. One evening, Joe and I, we hunted a river, and he set up on an edge with a bedding only like 40 yards away. I set up on a finger point that also had bedding on it. But the moral of the story is he was only 40 yards from the bed, and the deer got up and walked out an hour before dark. I only snuck into about 80 to 60 yards to the bed, and I would I would say, the deer walked out, but it was too dark for me to shoot or see for that matter. So I believe if I got another 20 or 30 yards closer, I think I would have been in the game. So getting close as possible to the bedding, that and spot checking for the marsh and swamps, those are really my main tactics.
Yeah.
Pretty much what you and Dan, all you guys do,
Yeah, the area, the particular area that we've hunted the last few years, I mean, my learning curve has really been that as well. When I started hunting the swamps and the marshes, it was, I'd get into sort of the center of the island almost. I'd find a heavy trail,
Right.
and I wasn't thinking about how those deer were necessarily bedding out in those cattails in relationship to the islands. And then similar thing, deer were getting to you late, you weren't seeing much, and obviously having some time spent in the woods with Dan and seeing how he skirts those transition lines and looks for a bunch of those trails coming together out of that cattail bedding or that swamp grass bedding tipped me off to the same thing. I got to get closer. Pay attention to where that wind is coming from. Is it a just off wind that's not blowing out to the bedding? Is it a wind in my face? Those sort of things. But yeah, I started doing a lot more early season sits where I was just doing observation stands where I'd, be in that just off wind scenario, an observation stand, but I still thought I could get a kill, but where I'd get up high enough where I could look out into that swamp at that potential bedding to see movement, and then make a decision and move based on that. So, yeah, I agree.
Right,
that's really important.
That's a good point. You brought that up because I actually do that too on the public marshes. I'll sit back like far away from the bedding and I'll do an observation sit just to see, what comes out. And if I like something or if I see something and I didn't quite get a glimpse at it, then I'll sneak in the next day a lot closer.
Right.
But,
yeah, there's some advantages again to being patient and doing that because
right.
You don't burn the spot right away. You give yourself some time to get some intel. So, good stuff. Good stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So, moving on to the next topic here, we've got it's the end of your 2016 season. You tagged out. You got the big flyer buck on the wall. You've got your nice 8 that you shot during gun season. So what's on your mind? What are you thinking about for this 2017 season? I know we've talked earlier. You and I share a passion of chasing the beloved carp in the spring and getting some arrows going with that. So I know that's on your mind. But what else you thinking about to prepare for the 2017 season?
Well, usually right after the season, the first thing on my mind is ice fishing. But no, I mean, I like to dwell on my failures. I really learn from my failures, not so much the success. So I'll think back and think of all the things that went wrong and how I can change that or make it better for the next season, I also think of all my encounters throughout the season. Those encounters really give me a good starting point for my winter/spring scouting where I want to start. I try to stay focused on just deer all year long, but it's kind of hard when, you have 4 seasons to mix in.
Yeah.
For me, it goes like this. Spring turkey /bow fishing /deer scouting /morel mushroom hunting into summer bow fishing /deer shining, velvet glassing, on in the bow season and in gun hunting, and then on in the ice fishing, and it's just one big endless cycle.
Yeah. A guy
so
only
it's kind of hard for me to focus just on deer.
Yeah. That's right. A guy only has so many hours in the day to get in all of his outdoor recreational time in,
Right?
No, that's good stuff. I think that's a big part of it. It's almost like cross training when you're fishing, when you're bow fishing, when you're turkey hunting, when you're doing these other things. I mean, you're heightening your senses in the outdoors. The more that you spend time, and I know you and I do this because we love doing it, and it's a passion. So it's not like it's you're going to work or it's a grind that you're doing or anything like that. So I think you learn a lot. You learn a lot from sneaking up on carp in a bog and trying to not spook them.
Oh yeah, yeah, especially in a kayak.
Right, right. Try doing that in a kayak.
Yep.
I think we tried that.
Oh yeah.
So,
But
so what are some of your goals for 2017? I mean, have you set really any yet, or is it more general?
oh yeah. Well, I would say my biggest 2017 goal is to get my girlfriend Jody her first bull buck.
Uh-huh.
It's been a rough ride these past couple of years with her hunting. She's a turkey slayer, of course, but when it comes to the bucks, it's kind of a different story. Either the buck is too far for her shooting capabilities, out of range, or they're standing in brush, or it's just an unethical angle, or simply just walk in too fast and she can't get her bow and draw, in time to shoot, stuff like that. But this past year, she finally came with me on a few public land cattail hunts.
Right.
And it was a little intimidating for her because she's so short, and the cattails are so high, and also add a little water and muck into the mix.
Yeah, I can attest to that. I'm not the tallest guy, so you get the first time. I think Dan drug me back into one of those spots, and he's hopping over logs and sloshing through stuff, and yeah, I couldn't see past what was in front of my nose.
Right. Well, she told me it was a lot of fun, and she's really looking forward to this season. So, I mean, sooner or later she'll connect with her first bull buck, and hopefully it's a public buck.
That's cool. That's cool.
But my second biggest goal, I would say, is to kill a good buck on public in a cattail marsh. Nothing huge, just a nice starter buck. Something I'm happy with. For some reason, they seem to be eluding me these past 5 or 6 seasons since I started hunting the marsh and the swamps. I don't know why. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I've had some great encounters with some nice bucks in the marsh, but it just hasn't come together for me yet.
Right.
But I'm set up too far away, or the thermals switch on me at dark and they blow. I'll be sitting there, and all of a sudden the wind is perfect the whole time. As soon as that sun goes down, I don't know if you ever noticed this, but that thermal will switch, and my wind will blow right into the bedding. So, I got to figure that out, too.
I've always tried to, I like when there's a steady, if it's a steady crosswind that keeps blowing, right at dusk, or a steady wind in your face. But yeah, when if it gets dead calm, especially I've noticed in the early season, if it gets dead calm in those swamps or marshes, that thermal just pulls your scent. I had an early season sit where I had some doe get up from bedding that I was sitting over, and that situation happened where the wind was in my favor all the way up until dusk, and then that wind stopped, and my thermals, it was hot out. I think it was 75 degrees that day, and I could just feel my scent, and I'm throwing milkweed, and I just see my thermals getting sucked right out towards that bedding, and those doe got up. She got up with a mom doe and 2 fawn, got within, I think it was 60 yards of me, put her nose up, and all of them turned around and trotted right back into the bedding area. So, yeah, can be tricky.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I got another quick cool story here. I was hunting a public marsh, and like you said, it was real warm that day, and the wind was in my face. It was great. And right before that sun went down, this beast buck, dude, he comes walking right down my trail. I'm like, oh yeah, here we go. Finally, I get my opportunity. And all of a sudden, this bush must have looked at the buck wrong or something, because this buck turned and just laid into this red brush like you wouldn't believe. Stuff was flying, branches were flying, sticks were snapping, and that sun went down, and I'm watching this, right? That sun goes down. All of a sudden, that thermal switches. He doesn't blow. He doesn't really look alert. the wind blows right to him. He turns around and he walks right back to the bedding area, like nothing even happened. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that really sucked. I thought for sure it was going to happen right then and there, but it didn't.
Well, it's a cool encounter and a good learning experience, though.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, there was another time I was walking out to this cattail island and the wind was howling like 30 miles an hour, and I'm walking out there and you can't hear nothing. I mean, the cattails are bent over, you know, and I walked within 5 feet of this bedded, like it was like a 130 class 8-pointer bedded there. He had no clue I was there. I walked past him. He jumped up, and he was literally like 5 feet from me. And I turn and look. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a buck standing there, you know.
Right.
So I'm thinking, do I grab my video camera or do I grab an arrow? Well, I decided to grab an arrow, and I swung my arm around to grab the arrow off the quiver. And when I did that, he saw the movement, but he still couldn't smell me because of the way the wind was going.
Right.
And he saw that movement. I'm reaching for the arrow, and as I'm doing that, I click it off. I click it onto my string, and the whole time I'm doing that, he's walking downwind of me to see what I am, because he could see me, but he just didn't know what I was because he couldn't smell me.
Right.
And I'm telling you, 5 more seconds. All I had to do was turn. I wasn't even going to aim. I was just going to draw back and shoot. And as I was turning, he got downwind of me, and he blew out of there.
Yeah.
I went on and hunted that island that night, and I came back through, and go figure, I walked right back through where I walked and kicked up that deer, and I kicked up, I don't know if it was the buck, but I almost guarantee you it was the buck. He probably came back to check out what happened, you know. I should have just set up right then and there, because there was a big pine tree right there in the cattails where I could have easily set up, but, you know, I just didn't know, you know, at the time. You know, it was a hard lesson learned.
Yeah, that's the old, you know, the bump scenario where they come back. They come back to check out that bed. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, I've had that happen to me, you know, once this past year and it was a spot that I knew there was a potential bed there, and I got a little aggressive, got close, bumped a deer, didn't know what it was, ended up setting up further north on the same point, and right at dusk I had a deer come back to that original bed. I heard him walk back through, or it walk back through. I couldn't see it because I had some thicket and stuff behind me. But I remember telling Dan that story, and he's like, well, you know, you probably in hindsight should have just set up right on top of that bed where you bumped the deer. I said, yeah, lesson learned. I'm going to do that next time, you know. Right.
That's for sure what I'm doing next time. No questions asked.
Well, good. So I guess next question, what advice do you have for guys that are just starting out? You know, I mean, you got in, you've been doing this for a while, like you mentioned, with being so involved in the outdoors as a kid. But guys that are just getting into this, I mean, I would say in general, how people go about learning about hunting with what's on TV and everything is a little bit off or warped sense of reality, to be nice about it. So what's your advice you give guys just starting out?
My advice would be as mobile and get as close as possible to the bedding as possible. We all hear it. You know, Dan says if you're not bumping deer on occasion when trying to sneak into the bedding, then you're not getting close enough, period. I mean, there's a few things I hear Dan repeat over and over and over, and that's one of them. He repeats things for a reason because, you know, it's truth. Or as he would say, there's a little bit of truth in everything he says. You know.
Yep.
But I see guys, you know, new to the bee-style hunting, and they want to dive right into it. Guys will go out and winter scout and find all these areas and think, man, that was easy. But come season, when it's 80 degrees out, swarms of mosquitoes, knee-deep, sometimes waist-deep muck, you think to yourself, man, I can't believe Dan goes through this stuff just to kill a buck, you know? I recommend beginners just start out small and working your way up to larger tracts of land and, longer hikes, especially in the marsh and the swamps. You're going to get wet. You're going to get hot. You're going to get cranky because your sticks are grabbing onto everything and anything. You're going to question why you just walked 2 miles out into no man's land just to kill a deer.
Yeah.
You'll be surprised on how many guys want to kill a mature buck, V-style, but don't want to put in the effort. That's just what I see. I mean, take the good with the bad and try to have a good time with it. Don't wear yourself out to a point where it's not fun anymore, because I've been there, I've done it, and I'm sure Dan has too, and maybe you have, I don't know. But, B-style isn't, huh?
No, that's all great advice. It's all great advice. Yeah.
But I was going to say, B-style isn't for everyone. Not everyone has free time like some of us to go out and scout and hunt like this, That's something you'll have to figure out and weigh out your options, whether it's family or work time or other obligations. But, that would be my advice for anybody starting the B-style hunting that thinks it's easy. Dan might make it look easy, but until you get out there and really do it, you really don't know,
I would agree. I like what you said about starting out small and
right.
And obviously just being realistic with yourself that you're going to have failures. I like your comment about getting ornery because your sticks and everything are catching and stuff. It's funny. I mean, I like the style. I'm going to do it as long as I can. I mean, there is a challenging aspect of it, but
right.
there's totally those sits where you go out and everything just seemed to go wrong. You got all sweated up walking out there. You fell down 3 times. When you were climbing up the tree was crooked, so you didn't get quite set how you wanted to. But
right.
I don't know. I think, it's like you put enough of those together and you start putting the pieces together. You can have some success. It only takes that one sit.
And
I'm like, I think guys got to realize you might have 15, 20 sits of nothing, but it just takes that one to get the success.
Right.
So good. Well, anything else you want to cover from a deer hunting perspective? Otherwise, I thought we might touch on your other passion, which is turkey hunting.
Oh, turkeys. I can talk a little bit about turkeys.
I know we got the spring turkey season coming up, and I know you like to knock down turkeys on a regular basis. So I'm sure guys would like to just hear your passion and hear some of the things that you do.
Let's see. Well, I started turkey hunting over in western Wisconsin on private land, and seems like the turkeys in western Wisconsin, they're a whole different breed than the turkeys over here. It's kind of hard to explain and see that until you actually hunt them, the different terrains.
Right.
Because over here they got a lot of coyotes. They got ridges and hills and valleys and stuff like that. Over here it's more flat, open country, farmland with swamps and stuff like that.
Right.
But I came real successful on the private land, and I would say the main reason why I clued in on the public land around here, it just seems like there's a lot more birds over here than there are over there in western Wisconsin. It just seems, what I see. But I really like roosting them. I would say that is my go-to tactic for killing public land toms. And when I mean that is I'll sneak in, I'll get real close, actually I should start off saying that in the winter months I really start watching flocks. Like I clue into where they are, what fields they're feeding in and stuff like that. And I hear guys say all the time, oh, the turkeys aren't in where you see them in winter, they're not going to be there in spring. Well, I tend to disagree with that because I do a lot of turkey scouting, and I've seen this, firsthand.
Okay.
Like for instance, I seen a flock in a field back in November a couple of years ago, and I kept watching them every month. It was same flock, same field, every day for all those months. And come spring, me and Jody actually killed 2 toms out of there. So can't really.
You can't really refute the results, right?
Right, exactly. But I would say I put on a lot of miles for public land birds. When I say that, I drive at least an easy 10,000 miles in a spring, from I would say early March to the end of May, just driving around, scouting, hunting, doing all that stuff. And walking, me and Joey can easily put on 3 or 4 miles in a day, just, hunting turkeys. But what I really like to do, and I know a lot of guys, they like roost hunting also, but what I like to do is I like to go out, find all these birds and sneak in real close at night.
Okay.
And I'll roost them. I'll get in there. I have several different owl hooters that I use. I have like 5 or 6 different calls of owl hooters because they all have a different tone and a different frequency, and they don't always, not all of them work, but I'll always get a tom to respond to one of those owl hooters. It's just a matter of which one I try. I'll go down the list, but I'll sneak in real close. And when I say close, I get real close, like within 50 yards. Guys, they freak out when they hear me say that. You shouldn't get within 100 yards of them. You're hurting your chance. They'll fly right over you in the morning. Yes, that's true. They do fly right over you, but what I've seen is the closer you get to them in the morning, like if you know where they are at night, and you can flip literally right under them. And when I say right under them, I mean like the tree they're in or within 30 yards of them. My success has gone up way higher than when I used to sit back like 100 yards, because sometimes those birds fly over you, yes, but most of the time when they wake up and they see those decoys right below them, it's a no-brainer. They drop right down, and obviously you've been following me on the beast, and you've seen my success on the roost hunting.
Right.
I mean, I'm usually only hunting for 2 hours, and I'm done. So
the calls you do on the night before is you're getting them to roost in a specific spot. Is that the goal there?
Well, it's not so much getting them to roost in a specific spot because they roost where they want to roost. What I do is I get in there and I see where they're roosting. They don't always roost in the same tree every night. They'll bounce around within 100 yards, of that area.
Right.
And what I do is I get in there real close right before dark. Like right when all the birds are done chirping, the sun is set. And if you know where the roost is, you can actually hear those turkeys fly up into the trees. And what I'll do is I'll sneak in as close as possible without getting busted, of course, because they have great eyesight. And I'll start hooting, And if that hooter doesn't work, well, I'll try it. What I do is I start out kind of far away with a louder hooter. And if they don't respond, then I'll sneak in a little closer with a more low-toned hooter because I don't want to sound like a 100-pound owl, hooting at them.
Right.
And then I'll sneak in a little closer if they don't respond, and I'll try even a lower-toned one. And there's this one call I have. It's really low-toned. For some reason, it strikes them every time, and it gets them to gobble. I also have this whistle that I found in my grandma's sewing box years ago. It's a brass whistle, and when you blow on that, it gives out a very high-pitched frequency, and that hits them every time. I don't know what it is about that whistle, but it will get that turkey to gobble.
Really?
Yeah, I showed Dan. He's like, really? I'm going to have to make a video on it this spring to actually show what I'm talking about.
Sure.
But... yeah, I learned that off an old DVD. It was Drury Outdoors, I believe, King of Spring. It was their very first video. I shouldn't say DVD because it was VHS back then.
Right.
But they had that whistle on there, and I remember watching that when I was younger, and I found that whistle. I'm like, hey, I'm going to try this, And sure enough, it works. believe it or not.
Well,
But
I'll have to remember that when I'm making my quest to get a turkey this spring.
yeah, I would say a few other tactics they use for getting on public land toms, the obvious. Getting in there, close to the roost, trying to get them off the roost. And if that doesn't happen, I'm not one to sit in a blind, just sit there all day. Because I believe if you sit in the same field, in the same blind, in the same corner, with the same decoys, in the same position, and you're calling all day, and that tom, he hears that same frequency of call all day in the same spot, they catch on. They're not stupid. As far as stupid as we think they are, they're really not that dumb.
Right.
I like to get out and chase them, If he ain't coming to me, I'm going to him, spotting and stalking. And I get a lot of heat for that on public from guys. Oh, you shouldn't be doing that. It's dangerous, Yeah, it is dangerous, but you got to be pretty stupid to, not tell the difference between a guy calling versus a real hen. You know what I mean?
Right.
Vice versa, the decoys, too. If you're sneaking up on some guy's decoys and you can't tell that's a decoy versus a real tom, then do us all a favor and just don't go hunting. I mean, stuff like that, I mean, I really love sneaking up on them, spotting and stalking. And another thing I'm getting into is fanning them with a fan. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but
I've seen it a little bit on shows, but not.
Yeah, I mean, the fan, it works. They come running. They see that fan, they come running. Not every time, but most of the time. It's crazy.
Well, it's nice if you're on public property. You can, if you've got multiple properties chained together, then you have a lot of land that you can do that run and gun or sneaking up on.
Yeah.
Versus, I know on private property I hunted, it's 60 acres and it makes it challenging. You get birds come on there. I know that sometimes they'll roost on the property, sometimes they've roosted off the property, sometimes they just use the property to pass through. But you get those one or two encounters, and I remember a couple seasons where I'd bump them to one corner of the 60 acres. And if I was lucky, they'd stay on it. Then I'd sneak over there, try to get set up on them, and then bump them back over to the other corner. Or I'd bump them off the property, and then the next day, they'd be back on. So, it can be, and that's in a kind of a hill country setting too, with what you're talking about, where they're using those ridges and they're using those points. They always seem to bed in these big oaks that are right on that ridge elevation where they got a nice spot that they can glide down on.
Yeah, they just pitch on or right off. I've seen them pitch way down, across a valley and up on the other side. It's like, why the heck did they do that?
Yeah.
But
I've seen them do that.
That's a good thing. That's a good key point that you brought up, public versus private. Like, I was only able to hunt 44 acres plus the farmers for turkey, so it was like maybe 800 acres I was able to turkey hunt. And my grandparents, they keep asking me, why don't you hunt over there anymore for turkeys? Well, number one, there just isn't that many turkeys over there as there used to be. Like, when I first started hunting over there, you'd wake up in the spring and there were turkeys surrounding our cabin on the ridges, Now you hear maybe one or two gobblers within 5 miles. I don't know what happened. If a disease came and wiped them out, if a predator, or maybe someone named Tyler.
Yeah, Tyler Whitt started hunting them.
Yeah. But, there's 26,000 acres over here. I'm definitely going to target 26,000 acres of public versus, 800 acres of private.
Right.
I mean, if something doesn't work out here, I just drive a mile down the road and I'm on another flock, So.
Yeah, it is. There's something fun about calling in a turkey. I don't know. I was camping with my family last spring, and the spot where we were camping, there's turkeys all around there. So I told my girls, I brought my call, and I told them, I said, we're going to get up in the morning. I said, we'll go sit over in this one spot because the turkeys were gobbling the previous morning when we had got up. So yeah, I actually called one of the turkeys in. He got within, I don't know, it was 20 yards of us in the thicket on the ridge, but they thought that was pretty cool that that turkey came charging in like that. Obviously, he saw us because we were kind of in an open area, and I wasn't.
Yeah.
I knew he was eventually going to come up on us and see us, but having him be that close and let out a big gobble, they thought that was pretty cool. So.
Oh yeah, it's a good way to get people into the outdoors too. Because I remember when I first met Jody, the very first time I took her out hunting, it was during the rut, and we had this flock of turkeys. And this was in November, mind you. They were gobbling on the roost, and she kept asking me, "What's that? What's that?" I was like, "Those are turkeys,
Right.
And they flew down and they made their way toward us. And I'm telling you, there was 5 or 6 toms strutting, and this was in November.
Wow.
And, this is the first time seeing this, and I'm sitting there scratching my head like, what the heck's going on, It's November. They shouldn't be strutting. But every once in a while, you'll see that in trail cam pics where there's a tom strutting, in you say in the fall.
Right.
But, yeah, that, she really got excited with that. And she's like, yeah, I want to go out with you in the spring next year. So I took her out turkey hunting, and she watched me kill a turkey, and then she got hooked. I mean, that was the end of that for her,
Nice.
She got hooked ever since, and that's all. She really likes turkey hunting, way more than deer hunting, which I see why, because, turkeys are vocal. You can call to them. They respond back, stuff like that.
Yeah, there's more interaction. Plus, when you have success with it, too, it helps. It's.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Well, good.
Yeah, she's got the first season this year, so she's got that whole week to herself. And she's pretty excited about that, so
well, I'm
going to be starting scouting for her, and I'm not saying it'll happen, but there's a good chance she'll have one on opening morning.
Yeah, I'm sure you guys will. I'll be waiting to see that. I know that you send out the pics and everything, so I'm sure we'll get some more pics of that. But,
oh, yeah.
Well, good. Any other topics you want to cover in general? This has been a good talk. I think you gave a lot of good insight into your mindset and how you go about hunting in general, and specifically with the examples of the deer you've taken and the turkey you've taken. I think guys can get a lot out of this, so it's been good.
Right. Yeah, I think I pretty much covered, like the basics. I could honestly do a whole nother podcast about turkey alone.
Well, and we might just have to do that.
But, as far as the deer hunting, the guys that are just getting into it, just take your time. Like I said, start out small. Don't get overwhelmed, because then that's when it's not fun anymore.
Right.
I mean, we all want it to be fun, That's why we all hunt. Well, most of us anyways. But, yeah, I don't know. That's pretty much covers it for deer hunting for me.
Well, good. Yeah, and like usual, if anyone has any questions for Tyler, hop on to thehuntingbeast.com. After this is up and posted, Tyler, I'm sure, will answer any of your questions, or, you can get more insight into what he does. But this has been a really good talk, and I appreciate it. So thanks, Tyler.
Yep.
That concludes today's podcast episode. Please go to thehuntingbeast.com to post any discussions, questions, or comments regarding today's podcast episode.